Don't forget to like and share. One more puff. All right, folks, welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. First of all, before we get into this, of course, like and share, like and share. If you like the videos, don't forget to like them, share them far and wide, and subscribe. Of course, whether you're on Rumble, go over to YouTube and do it. And on YouTube, actually, you go over to Rumble to do it, really pushing the Rumble. But of course, the best place to follow us is on Locals, peoplespundit.locals.com. Thank you to everybody who did vote yesterday. I know it was kind of like last minute. It was a 24-hour thing, and I was actually even wrong on it being Central Time, not Eastern Time. Alas, well, Winston did not win the international contest, but thank you for participating and joining. I'm like, how could that not be? I don't know if you saw it, but we had congressmen and judges and all sorts of people pushing it, but apparently we lost. There were some celebrity dogs up in there, so I didn't know that. So there's only one thing left to do. First of all, congratulations to the winner, but there's only one thing left to do: make Winston a celebrity dog, right? Who's with me? I'm telling you, he's going to be in a magazine coming up soon and everything. So that's a really good time to launch his own Instagram account with 1 million followers. All right. So, see you on the next one. We did raise a good $2,500 though for the local chapter of Paws of War, which is a very, very good achievement. And I was happy to do it. I was glad that we were asked to do it, and I was honored. And it's great. I love doing stuff like this. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Because we have a long video we have to play, or at least it's not long, but it's longer than most normal videos that I like to play, and there's a reason for that. It's because I do think that it will have an impact, whether or not Republicans allow this to become an Achilles heel or not. The former president, is much smarter than most Republicans on this. And listen, I'm always going to give you what I think is the political truth. I'm not going to give you my own opinion, my own personal opinion, just for what's the word I'm looking for? I guess full disclosure here. My own personal opinion, even though I'm rather liberal on certain things, for people who know me, they know that. But when it comes to abortion, I don't know. I had my first son. You look at that screen even early, and you realize whether you were raised in, when you were born in New York City and raised in the tri-state area, public education in the 90s, they told you that it was just a blob of cells. It's not a baby. They're liars. I'm sorry. It's just true. You take a look at that screen real early and you're like, oh my God, that's a baby. And even if you don't identify it as such, very, very early, it's life. One day we're all going to die. And you're going to realize on that bed how precious this short amount of time that we have on this earth really is. And how dare you snuff that out from anyone? Especially somebody who is helpless and defenseless. Why? Because you want a college degree? Because let's be honest, white women who get abortions, we know the reasons for them. They're disgusting and despicable. You don't want your body to age? You don't want to lose your body? That's what it is. It's the statistics. It's not me. You're afraid you're going to sag, so we're going to snuff out a life? I'm sorry. I can't get on board with that. That's my own personal opinion. But I know that that's not the politics of the country as of right now. And the former president is walking this line. That's the smart line. And I know that people like the pro-life, people who have been in the pro-life movement now for decades, since the start of Roe v. Wade, or have benefited from it. Maybe they're younger, but they are now like the standard bearers of the people who came before them. They don't know what to do with themselves when this issue is gone. The right has their own versions of Jesse Jackson's, of Al Sharpton's. The civil rights era is over. Jim Crow is over. Is there racism still in this country? Sure. Is it prevalent? No. Are there people being beaten and thrown out of diners? No. Are there people being denied certain seats on the bus? No. Are there people being denied the right to vote based on the color of their skin? No. It doesn't exist, and the data doesn't suggest it exists. Not in any systemic issue. Sorry, you're wrong. Black voters have consistently voted at higher shares every year since the 80s era, speaking of Jesse Jackson. He played a very prominent role in getting black voters to vote at much higher rates, and for that, he should be super proud of himself. But the victimization industry, the civil rights, it's an industry. This is what you have to understand. Just like the abortion industry is an industry, billions of dollars. Pro-life movement isn't quite that because it's not. But there certainly are people who just can't let it go. They wouldn't know where they belong and where they fit in this political process if the abortion industry was ever truly defeated, if the issue of abortion was snuffed out of the political debate altogether. They would be lost. And while I have my own personal views, for the truth of the matter is, for 40 years plus, now more than that, Republicans and pro-life movement, anyone who was pro-life, and there used to be Democrats who were pro-life. Last week, we played a video of a state senator from Nebraska who switched to the Republican Party. He was a Democrat. He was pro-life. There used to be pro-life Democrats everywhere. And nobody was arguing Roe v. Wade should be overturned, and then immediately another federal action should be taken. Nobody was arguing. That was not the mainstream argument for opponents of abortions for years. Were there always some people who thought there needed to be a federal amendment? There was, of course. But that was not what you told the American public. I'm sorry, pro-life movement. You need to listen up. This is not what you told the American public. You told the American public that when Roe v. Wade was overturned, it wouldn't outlaw abortion. It would kick it back to the states and there would be reasonable restrictions on abortion. Most of us do have a carve out for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. This is what you told the public. Were there some people who said, I have no exceptions? Yes. No exemptions? Yes. But they are not the national voice. They were never the national voice of the pro-life movement. They were a part of it. They were on the fringe. Everyone else said, nah, it's a states' rights issue. When Roe v. Wade was first adopted by the court, that was the argument. States should have a right to choose. You want to have an abortion? Pick your ass up and move to another state. So that's the way it was, and now there seems to be this flip-flop, and they're getting creamed at the ballot box, one amendment after another, one initiative after another, one proposal after the other, because they are doing something that the American public did not expect that they would do. Democrats said they would do, scared them for years saying that they would do it, and what did they do? They did it. Hold on one second. All right, so this is not the way forward and never was. Is there a way to get to that ultimate end? Yes. And people like myself, I've seen Robert Cahaley do it. I know people who have hired Robert Cahaley to do research to do it. I know I've been hired by people to do research to do it. I've done public research explaining. I'm not sure any pollster, except for Gallup, who has been polling abortion longer, because of course I was in diapers when Gallup was around. When they were the gold standard, I was in diapers. But I don't know anybody else outside of Gallup that has polled this issue more deeply than we have at Big Data Poll. And I'm talking about granular. I'm talking about getting to the core of what people believe. And we have showed you over and over again that many people identify as pro-choice because they think of pro-life as no exceptions to the rule, period, end of story. Yet when you ask them about their specific opinions, pro-lifers are much more steadily pro-life than pro-choicers are steadily pro-choice. What do I mean by that? Ask and start with asking the simple question: do you identify So, when it comes to abortion, do you identify as pro-life or pro-choice or vice versa, pro-choice or pro-life? And typically, we always had it much closer than some others. It is not the 90s anymore. But typically, pro-choice has a slight edge, even though that has been narrowed in the 21st century. Why? Not even the advent of science, but advances in science that have been unkind to the abortion industry. The realities of the Kermit Gosnells, the realities of Planned Parenthood. As we learn more about life and pregnancy in this world, as humans, their understanding of conception and how life is created and developed over time. The blob of cells argument from the 90s just doesn't work anymore. So when you ask people who identify as being pro-choice, what is your deal? Where do you stand, for instance, on a heartbeat bill? When a baby's heart can be detected, do you still support abortion? Immediately off the rip, a huge chunk of voters who call themselves pro-choice will say, no, it's too late. There's a heartbeat. One lady told me, and she'll stick with me forever, somebody in her family had just passed away. And she said, he was gone when the doctor could no longer detect his heart was beating. If that's how we identify the moment of death for a human being, then if somebody is pregnant and that baby's heart is beating, they're alive. I don't care what they look like. I don't care how many fingers they have, how many toes they have, if they have any, what's developed where. Their heart is beating. It's life. What makes you pro-choice then? Well, I believe if a mother's in trouble, if someone's been raped, right. You go further and say, what about the Pain Protection Act from the mid-2010s? What about at the 20 to 25 week period when doctors have argued, many doctors and researchers showed that it appears the baby can feel pain. And I'm talking about people, not just everyone. Specifically, there are people who will say they're pro-choice and no, I don't support a ban when the heart is beating. But what about when doctors have identified a stage around 20 months when a baby can feel pain? Around 20 weeks, excuse me. Over a third of pro-choice voters are out at that point. I'm out. If the science shows they can feel pain, I'm out. That's cruel. At least a third. We've had it sometimes closer to 50%, and as you guys have known, if you've been following us a while, sometimes you get just above a bare majority with pro-choice voters. That's too cruel for them. And by the way, women more so than men in almost all of the surveys and research we've done. Liberal men, on the other hand, they are just absolutely dying to kill a baby. Surprised? They care more about it, the right of that woman to do it, than the woman does. That's the truth. I'm sure they do. Then that would mean they'd have to be a father. Maybe too hard for them. What about if you still don't support a prohibition, a ban on a heartbeat, on the moment the baby's heartbeat is detected, or at roughly 20 weeks when the baby can feel pain? What about 6 months and above, late stage pregnancy? Folks, it's a super majority. Huge numbers of pro-choice voters oppose late-term abortion. So this is not what the right decided to do. Listen to Ronald Reagan, take a little piece of the loaf, keep coming back for more. We had almost a half a century of abortion culture in this country. And as disgusting as you may find that, or repulsive as you may find that, if you're a pro-life person listening, you have to understand that the left did not get there overnight. The left, little by little, massive amount of effort. The entertainment industry reinforcing them. The media helping prop up their message. Handicapping over and over and over. You thought you were just going to jump right to a prohibition right from the gate as soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned? Then you are foolish. And you pro-lifers out there, these and I mean career pro-life movement people, you all know who the hell I'm talking about. I would ask you to think about this for a second. What are you going to do if you get it? What are you going to do? You should have considered it job security to listen to the experts like Robert, who came up with very similar conclusions than we did. Start where everybody agrees and just keep chipping away at it. The science is going to help you. It's barbaric. You know what? I find it hilarious and ironic that we look back, and by the way, a little bit hypocritical. Now we look back at the ancients, like the Spartans or something. Oh, how cruel to give your kid over to the army at 6 years old. Well, at least they had that kid. At least they had that kid. And yes, they did get, unfortunately, there were babies in cultures like that and others that were disposed of if they were deemed to be too weak to survive. Very different time, don't you think? Very, very different accommodations in the modern world, medically, hygienically, right? I mean, over and over. Education-wise, development-wise, very, very different. Resource-wise. And back then, you needed to pull your own weight. And I have listened to people look back on other cultures and civilizations, and I think to myself, are you aware of what we've done in the last 50 years? So anyway, let's play this clip, and then what are we at? 12:19. Yeah, let's play this clip. Gotta do it. And it is a little bit long, but I think it's important. And then we'll play. This is how you know he hit. I'm going to play another clip that tells you this is how you know he hit the mark. Now, I still wouldn't give him an A+, and I'm going to tell you why we're not going to grade him an A+, but he does get an A. All right, so let's play it, and we'll explain that when we come back.
Leadership, the Republican Party will always support the creation of strong, thriving, and healthy American families. We want to make it easier for mothers and families to have babies, not harder. That includes supporting the availability of fertility treatments like IVF in every state in America. Like the overwhelming majority of Americans, including the vast majority of Republicans, conservatives, Christians, and pro-life Americans, I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious baby. What could be more beautiful or better than that? Today, I'm pleased that the Alabama legislature has acted very quickly and passed legislation that preserves the availability of IVF in Alabama. They really did a great and fast job. The Republican Party should always be on the side of the miracle of life and the side of mothers, father, their beautiful babies, and that's what we are. IVF is an important part of that, and our great Republican Party will always be with you in your quest for the ultimate joy in life. Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights, especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade.
Pause. I just got to say, of course, all scholars did not. Our enemies mean I'm embellishing a little bit. I think what he should have said, and of course, Trump. You never take him literally, but you take him seriously. What did Rush used to say? And he was right. Or how his supporters definitely viewed him. People, even people who don't like him but voted for him. They take him seriously, but not literally. But here's the deal with this. There was Roe v. Wade was a joke. Even Lawrence Tribe himself argued that it was a joke of legal logic. It wasn't there. And they just wholly fabricated a right to have an abortion. And so I think that's what he means, that there is widespread agreement that the law was bunk. I mean, not the law because there's a law passed. I mean, the law, how it is in the face of, in the eyes of the law, it was not a credible decision. It was total bunk.
They wanted it ended.
But
it must be remembered that the Democrats are the radical ones on this position because they support abortion up to and even beyond the 9th month.
True.
The concept of having an abortion in the later months and even execution after birth, and that's exactly what it is. The baby is born, the baby is executed after birth, is unacceptable, and almost everyone agrees with that. My view is now that we have abortion where everybody wanted it from a legal standpoint, the states will determine by vote or legislation or perhaps both, and whatever they decide must be the law of the land, in this case, the law of the state. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. At the end of the day, this is all about the will of the people. You must follow your heart or, in many cases, your religion or your faith. Do what's right for your family and do what's right for yourself. Do what's right for your children. Do what's right for our country and vote. So important to vote. At the end of the day, it's all about will of the people. That's where we are right now, and that's what we want, the will of the people. I want to thank the 6 justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch, incredible people, for having the courage to allow this long-term, hard-fought battle to finally end. This 50-year battle over Roe v. Wade took it out of the federal hands and brought it into the hearts, minds, and vote of the people in each state. It was really something. Now it's up to the states to do the right thing. Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart on this issue, but remember, you must also win elections to restore our culture and, in fact, to save our country, which is currently, and very sadly, a nation in decline. Our nation needs help. It needs unity. It needs us all to work closely together. Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, everyone, we have to work together. We have to bring our nation back from the brink, and that's where it is. It's at the brink, and we will. We will do it. I promise you, we will do it. Always go by your heart, but we must win. We have to win. We are a failing nation, but we can be a failing nation no longer. We will make our nation great. We will make our nation greater than ever before. Thank you very much.
All right, so there it is. Bottom line, why I say it doesn't get an A plus is because, again, I did my little correction there. It's not 100%, but God, it's close. So if an A is a 98 or above, it's a 97 politically. The only reason why I would say not an A plus, if an A plus is a 98 and above, is because you give the media something, distract with when you say something like what he said before, which is not true. What he should have said is that scholars widely agree, and they do, that Roe v. Wade was not correct on the law, in the eyes of the law, although they supported the right to an abortion. So they support the decision itself. They don't support the logic of the law. Even Lawrence Tribe, the hack that he is now, spent many years writing that. And everybody knows what Donald Trump meant in this world. But unfortunately, not everybody lives in this world. And the media had something that they could grab onto and distract from an otherwise perfect, flawless political message. Because I was going to get the clip. We don't need to play it again. I've played it probably 50 times in this show to prove a point. Rewind to the debate against Hillary Clinton when she tried to pull this because she knew that he was surging, and she tried to pull up the issue of abortion. And because he had said, well, if I get elected, Roe v. Wade is gone. I mean, that's just necessarily going to happen because I'm going to appoint conservative justices who are going to do what they say they're going to do. I'm not going to have a George W. Bush, a George Bush, Sandra Day O'Connor. I'm not going to have, a Chief Justice Roberts. I'm going to appoint people who will do what Republicans have promised to do all of these decades, which is end Roe v. Wade. She tried to jump on it, and he just turned to her and he said, "Hillary, you're the radical. You support ripping babies out of the womb up until the point of birth." And of course, the fact checker, and she went, fact checkers. Do you remember that? Unbelievable. Of course, Democrats support abortion, late term abortion. Of course, they even support what you saw people like Dr. Kermit Gosnell get caught doing. Of course, they support the abortion in late terms and God knows when else. The barbaric stuff that Planned Parenthood has been caught doing. And then the literally harvesting and selling of the baby's body parts. I mean, of course they do, but they don't want people to focus on that. They want to focus on the what perceived radical position of those who don't support exceptions. And personally, even in me, I'm not a woman, but I have met people who are the product of rape who went on to do incredible things. I have brought up this example before, bring it up again. Police officer. He's just a wonderful person. He has saved other women from being victimized. And so if we just murked every baby that was a product of rape, he would not be around. So I'm very torn on that. But I'm not a woman, so I recognize that. But in any event, this is an A because he's walking the line of where the vast majority in this country is. And here's the bottom line. You can be as principled as you want to be. You cannot win with the no exceptions policy. In fact, even some of those early bans, again, I personally support them. It's irrelevant to what I personally support. Americans are going to need to be for the 50 years of abortion industry propaganda that they have been subjected to. So if you cannot win elections, then what is the point? That's the argument the former president is making, and that's the correct argument. Because guess what? You can stand on your principles and get your ass kicked, and then there'll be millions of more babies being murdered every day. Here's how you know he's over the target. And by the way, like he said, follow your heart. And listen to your faith, whatever it may be. Some Republicans are going to be able to do that. I have a guest coming up in a little bit, John O'Shea's in Texas 12. It's a very red district. He's running against somebody who will no doubt stab you in the back on issues like abortion. But he can do it because his constituents want that. All right. So I'm not telling people who are in R plus 20, R plus 30 districts not to do, and neither is that's the message the president was trying to send as well. But you cannot have a national message of no exceptions. You will not win. Ohio will go back to Democrats. It will. You think just because Trump wins it by 10 points, it's a Republican state? It is not. Had that ballot initiative go. You want me to put up the map again? So here's how you know he was over the target. Let's play Biden's war room clip, which he clipped 9 seconds of.
States will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be. Many states will be different. Many will have a different number of weeks, or some will have more conservative than others, and that's what they will be.
Wow. 4+ minutes I just ran, including the context of that clip. And that's what the Biden-Harris war room did and put out all over the place. Because they know what Donald Trump just said completely kneecaps their ability to run on abortion in any capacity. Now, maybe they'll be successful when it comes to certain congressional races, Senate races, whatever. If there are other Republicans who don't see the wisdom of what the former president is trying to say, all right, his own personal view is not that view. And I know it to be true, even though Donald Trump was once upon a time, like myself, by the way. Again, I'm a product of the 80s and 90s. You don't know if you're not, you don't know how we were raised. You don't understand how we were raised, what they told us in health class, in gym, right, Laura? All through middle school and high school. I mean, nobody can support what they said with science anymore, but I still know tons of people in my peers in my age group that I went to school with who still believe it, right or wrong. And I know he's a true convert because I know the story of why Donald Trump was once upon a time. I myself was fairly socially liberal when it came to, especially when it came to abortion. No joke. Until I saw the ultrasound live. Then everything changed. My entire world changed. Donald Trump, he has his own personal story. He's told it before. You want to listen to it? Go ahead. I'm not going to relay it here, but that's his conversion story. Science has been unkind to the pro-choice movement, but it hasn't been devastating. It hasn't knocked it out of the box yet. That will take time. All right, it's 12:32. With that in mind, let me shut the hell up and bring on my guest, who's back from the border, because these two issues are going to be combative issues, countervailing forces on each other. And then after we're done with John, well, maybe I'll even throw in some questions about it. But the issues of abortion and immigration are going to be countervailing forces. It's going to be inflation and the economy, which we're going to talk about later. But there's no doubt that these two issues will have a major impact. And my next guest just came back from the border, in fact, who's running, like I said, for Texas's 12th congressional district. John, welcome back, my friend. It's good to see you as always.
Hey, Rich, how you doing today?
Living the dream, brother. Living the dream. First of all, thanks for coming back on.
Oh,
And
my pleasure.
I want to just kind of give you the floor because we all hear about it every day on the news, John, with this many migrants come through. But until you go to the border and you have it explained to you, like by people who are at the border and do this for a living, until you go to the border and hear the stories, until you go to the border and hear the secondary human tragedy that occurs because of immigration, illegal immigration, until you hear about the trafficking stories, human and drug and guns, right, and weapons, until you hear all of that, you don't know. You know it's bad. You may
Right.
you may think about the cultural aspect of this. How do we maintain a culture when we have such a low fertility rate? How do we maintain a national identity when we have such a low fertility rate? And all that's very great and very academic, and I'm very concerned about it. But when you get down there and listen to the Border Patrol tell you about these human interest stories, which and they're not even human interest, like human tragedy stories, John, then you don't really know. And I'd like to just throw it to you with that and tell us what you did.
Sure. Well, the first thing is, and I know you weren't doing this, but too oftentimes people are conflating immigration with actual border and national security. And those
Yeah.
are two separate issues. Yeah, they're intertwined, but if anybody wants to have a discussion about legal immigration, I'm all for it. But that's not what we're doing right now. And in fact, what I guess
Amen.
it was funny. I went down there thinking I already had a fairly firm grasp of the subject, but even what I learned was so illuminating. We have literally swaths of the state that are under cartel control. I mean, there are people who are afraid to report what they see or to report, their fences being cut or situations because there are members of the cartel who are actually embedded in these communities right now. Um, we flew into Del Rio and, dropped off our bags. And then we headed right down to Eagle Pass and we went to Shelby Park. And, look, I understand that people are applauding Governor Abbott for, finally doing something about the border. I guess 10 million illegal aliens were okay, but 10,000,001 was one too many. But I hate to say it, if you think that Texas has locked it down and it's a model for the rest of the country to follow, you're in
Ha!
for a rude awakening. Shelby Park basically has containers on one side, so the park itself, was kind of divided between a golf course and baseball fields and kind of recreational area. Well, and then there's the port of entry bridge that kind of goes right over the top, over the river connecting Texas and Mexico. And what we saw was that there are literally containers on one side with concertina wire, but they haven't cut the foliage back. There were more guards stationed at the front gate than there were actually on the perimeter. And that on the other half of the park, they literally were people playing golf. The vaunted buoy barricade that was set up in the river that supposedly the media was making such tragic remarks about these poor illegal aliens, or well, newcomers, the way they call them,
Yeah.
are getting
New
caught up in these.
arrivers.
Yeah, and we're drowning. Well, actually, I had pictures of National Guardsmen showing me of kids playing on them. They're so ineffective. In fact, they originally were going to do 6,000 feet. They ordered the first 1,000 feet at $1 million without actually even speaking to any of the boots on the ground to find out if it was wanted or appropriate. And that it proved to be so ineffective that they just canceled the rest of it. So we toured the Shelby Park area. We went over the point of entry. As we were going there, we actually had somebody from one of the foundations who was kind of the border expert, somebody who'd served in the military and then had been part of DHS until, as he put it, he could no longer be complicit in human trafficking anymore. And what he said was, look, the one good thing they did by, Governor Abbott taking the park and, away from Customs and Border Patrol was at least they removed one of their big processing areas where they were processing 500 to 600 illegal aliens a day into the country, because as we all know, it's catch and release. But he said they're so brazen and open about things now. And I said, well, is there any kind of telltale sign that the cartels, use for the human traffickers to let people know they're there and available? And he said, yeah, they use Browning decals or Browning shirts. So like the gun manufacturer. And he said, and they even differentiate the male, traffickers will wear the brown, and then the women will actually wear pink. And so, we kind of watched along there. There wasn't a lot of activity coming over at that point, because as they explained, it's kind of like squeezing a balloon in the middle. And basically, the traffic is kind of pushed out to both sides.
Huh.
So I will also note that we were originally supposed to be given a tour of the river and a personal tour inside of Shelby Park, but Governor Abbott found out some of the people that were part of our group and had those privileges revoked, almost as if he didn't want people knowing exactly what is going on.
Unbelievable.
And then from there, we went up river and kind of looked at where the barrier ended. And you could just see the concertina wire that they're putting up, to their credit. I mean, they are, but then there's just blankets and clothing of people just throwing it over the razor wire to climb over. And in fact, they even said that at night they call in the patrol boats at 5 in the evening, and then the human traffickers and the drug smugglers just row up with their boats and just start clipping wire. And the way that the National Guardsmen are instructed, all they're allowed to do is to yell at people and tell them to stop. They can't fire a warning shot. They can't put their hands on them. They can't do anything to escalate. And from there we went on to Kinney County, which has kind of had some notoriety for the trafficking that's going on through there. And we visited with a rancher who has 22 miles of perimeter fence and gets clipped almost on a routine basis, and has lost all kinds of livestock as a result of it. We visited with the chief deputy for the area and the district attorney. And even though the county only has 3,600 people, they're currently in the midst of 5,000 felony charges for illegal migration, kind of entering and trespassing. And then lastly, we had a dinner with a number of National Guardsmen, both active and former Guardsmen, who wanted to meet in anonymity because they feared retribution for telling the story about what's going on. And these poor guys, ever since Operation Lone Star began, they haven't even been given what's called the command intent. Basically, what is the rule of the mission? Think about that for a second. So we've secured our border, and yet the people who are actually boots on the ground don't even have what the mission objective is. And oh, by the way, they report up to the DPS. So you've got law enforcement leading military elements with no rules of engagement, patrolling the border, and basically being demoralized while putting themselves in harm's way and really not effectively controlling anything other than just kind of diverting the path of the illegal invasion.
Well, first of all, let me say this. Two things. The first, a couple of things. But the first thing you said, really, I appreciate a lot, which is that you think you have a good grasp on it. You really do, until you go and you see it. You hear it
Right.
from people who do it on their own, and then it's like even eye-opening to people who obsessively follow this in the media, obsessively follow it when it comes to elections, people running for office like you are, you know, and then you don't until you don't realize there are parts of United States territory that are under cartel control. You don't
Correct.
realize that there are task force in history. I'm not slamming law enforcement, but I'm saying Border Patrol is getting it from both sides. They have
Right.
enemies across the border, actually on all sides, enemies across the border, enemies in Washington, D.C., and sadly, oftentimes, enemies in local law enforcement who are corrupted and or afraid of the cartels. And if you don't think that they got their hands in pockets of politicians in DC, then you're not living in reality. And until we have this very honest conversation about corruption in our own government from these cartel leaders, folks, they're afraid.
Right.
Or they're willing to just take the dollar, but they're afraid. It's like Pablo used to say, it's either the money or it's the lead. Which is it going to be? The silver
Right.
or the lead? And that still has been the way they look at it, for a long time. And you talk about how all they're doing is allowed to yell at people. It makes me think of Billy Hayes, for people who don't know who this is. Maybe you saw the movie Midnight Express, or maybe you like the show Locked Up Abroad, right? And Billy Hayes got life in a Turkish prison, which he winds up escaping from. A brutal prison, disgusting conditions. Abusive is not the word. Okay, I mean they rape and beat and murder. The guards are awful, and they're just as bad as the inmates. Billy was transporting hash, got caught, got busted, was thrown in jail. When he escaped and made it across the border to Greece, they were going to shoot him on the spot. So and this is another thing we just don't talk about until the modern era. And there's still many countries like, I dare you to try to sneak into another country as an American. I dare you to try to sneak. Go to a Central American country and try to walk across the border without a passport. I dare you. I
Yeah.
I freaking dare you. They will murder you. Go to Afghanistan and try to walk across the border into Iran. See what happens. You will get mowed down. That will be it's like in our country, John, we're not allowed to use police power. And yeah, I am talking about using police power. We're not allowed to do that, even in what is an appropriate role, even in the situation of what is an appropriate function of government, which is to protect the border. There's immigration and then there's national security. And did they talk to you? I mean, we were talking, you just mentioned a lot about the cartel and everything. Did you have conversations about the national security implications of all this?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the other thing I'll say is that it's very clear that that the invasion, as everybody knows, but I
It's an
mean just
invasion.
basic confirmation, it's completely intentional. In
Yeah.
fact, under President Trump, they had what was called the Cortina program, where the military, because Texas has the TMD, Texas Military Department, was do ride-alongs with law enforcement officers, game wardens, sheriffs, county, police, and that it kind of served a dual purpose. Then you had law enforcement and military, because you don't want, unless the military has been deputized,
Yeah.
the military to be doing policing functions. I mean, there's rules against that. Not that we really protect our civil liberties anymore these days, but the minute the Biden administration walked in, they cut it. And it's look, even the people who are boots on the ground understood that this is a controlled invasion that is being perpetrated by the globalists who want to destabilize this country. They do not want people here to not only believe in American exceptionalism, but they want to throw everything into turmoil. And look, it's the same playbook that they've done in kind of inundating Western Europe. And we've seen what happens when you bring a large group of people who are not seeking asylum. In fact, that was one of the gentlemen who was Hispanic, actually had been in the National Guard for a number of years on the border and was Jewish. So I told him, I said, well, you're kind of making my head explode. He was a rabbi. And in fact, he said he was a Messianic Jew. I said, well, I could have a whole evening conversation with you. But he said something that was really interesting that I had never thought of before. And he said, look, I have never once picked up or detained anybody who entered this country illegally who thought of becoming a US citizen, who thought of assimilating. And so, it makes sense. I mean, I did immigrate to South America, and I understand it's a pain in the neck, and they make you go through all kinds of hoops to show that you're
Yep.
not going to be a strain on their social services and
Yep.
that you're going to be a net positive to that country. Because our primary obligation is to the citizens, to we the people. We're the ones who the Constitution affords and protects the rights of. And while those people have God-given rights as well, but it's not our obligation to take care of the world. It's our obligation to take care of our own. And then if and when we're doing a good job of that, which I would put forward right now, we are not, then maybe we can talk about some additional help and assistance. And like I said, I'm all about opening up the conversation about whether or not the current immigration level is right, or if the process could be streamlined, but again, we need to be looking at people who are coming in who want to be US citizens, who are willing to assimilate, willing to embrace our values, the Judeo-Christian ethic of this country, and not people who are coming to freeload or worse yet, do us harm. And that was the other thing too. They said, look, of the 350 plus terrorists that were on the watch list, there's no telling how many more have gotten away. And candidly speaking, there's no telling, according to the state personnel, how many they've actually caught and or processed, because the federal government's not giving them access to the database. Again, it's completely intentional. They have that information. They just choose not to share it because they don't want the real word getting out. And when you think about the thousands and thousands of fighting age males who are coming over here seemingly well dressed, fit, and they're just being dispersed all throughout the country, it really is a chilling effect.
Yeah, this is what I want. We just got done in our book club yesterday reading this book for people who don't know what it is. Kevin Phillips, The Emerging Republican Majority, written in 1969. Because this idea of whether this is intentional or not, you read this book, you cannot possibly get to the end of the book and then say that if you don't believe it's intentional, then you don't understand your political enemies and adversaries well at all. In fact, you're underestimating their intelligence, because this is written in 1969 while people are trying to make sense of the Nixon landslide. Okay. And let me just read this to you real quick. Okay. Map 47, which you don't need to see, but sketches the emerging Republican majority. The core GOP areas are the mountain, farm, and outer South states. The Deep South will become a GOP core area once it abandons third-party schemes. The Democratic stronghold is obvious: New York and New England. Most of the upcoming cycle's serious presidential campaign strategy will relate to three battleground areas: the Pacific, which of course includes what? California. The Ohio-Mississippi Valley, which is Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, and Missouri, and the non-Yankee Northeast, right? Overall trends favor Republicans in each of these battlegrounds. And he goes on to say that now you know why early election returns barely final. Richard Nixon announced he was transferring his voting residence from New York to Florida, and picked a cabinet notably short of representatives from the Northeastern establishment. And Democrats waited only a little longer to replace Louisiana's Russell Long with Massachusetts' Edward Kennedy as their Senate whip. A new era has begun. When, of course, we know who Ed Kennedy was, for people who don't understand what he's trying to say there. At that point, Republicans had California locked down. That was a red state. The booming suburbs of Ventura, Los Angeles, and Orange County were deeply conservative. You would only be you have to be an idiot, a naive idiot who's just, fell off the turnip truck, to not understand that years ago, Edward Kennedy, vocal proponent of replacement theory, right? Oh my God, replace the word we're not allowed to use. A vocal proponent of it when others were not, other Democrats were not. He led this charge. He absolutely understood what Phillips was saying, and they have been doing this for many, many, many years. But here's the kicker, John. in the end, the Hispanics that have been here and have politically gone through political maturation, it's a big talk of this election, how much they've swung to the right. They're not, just Trump. He's certainly more than Republicans, but even just toward Republicans, Trump is even leading with Hispanics in certain polls, not our own, but very close. And I can't help but to look at and I don't want to jump the shark because this is the next segment I'm going to do in the next hour, but I can't help but to look at stuff like this. This is employed full-time, medium usual weekly real wages, and wage and salary workers that are Hispanic or Latino, 16 years and over. Nothing. Flat. Garbage. Worthless in the Biden era. And so they can't rely on the domestic white population to vote for them, not until everyone's gone to college. They can't even rely anymore on the immigrants from 30 years ago that Ted Kennedy wanted to bring in here to turn California blue. They can't even do that anymore because of this. Their policy sucks and people don't feel their so-called economic recovery. So they need to flood with new people who need those social safety nets. And of course, that means voting Democratic when you get finally eligible to do so. Let's just get down to the brass tacks of this. What is your opponent going to do to stop this?
Well, look, again,
or what would your opponent do to stop this?
Well, I can tell you what he's been touting. He's been touting the fact that, Texas is at the vanguard of leading this fight to stem this illegal invasion. And what I can tell you right now is that it was dishearteningly just
Smoke and
performative.
mirrors.
There
Yep.
is nothing that is actually being done, and nobody really cares. So long as they're able to report numbers, but even then, when they're capturing people, unless we actually get this SB4, which would allow them to imprison people for illegally entering the country, and that's before the courts right now, which, by the way, being argued by our attorney general, who he voted to impeach.
Eesh.
So, it's crazy. What he says is that, look, we passed SB3, which was Senate Bill 3, and SB4, Senate Bill 4, which finished the completion of the border wall and actually made it illegal to enter and raise the penalties for trafficking people. Well, what I can tell you is, notice that those were Senate bills. Oh, by the way, they were after 3 years of this invasion occurring. And then even then, it was only after 3 special sessions because this Republican Party in the Texas House, under the leadership of Dade Phelan, prioritized impeaching our own attorney general at the behest of the Democrats over actually securing our border and passing border security law. In fact, there were 2 bills in the general session that got gutted and killed by House leadership. So if he wants to run on that, I tell him, hey, knock yourself out. And I'll point to the fact that you voted with the Democrats to kill a constitutional amendment that would have required only U.S. citizens get to vote in Texas elections. I would love to know the logic behind that vote. What did he have to trade in order for that to make sense? Because it passed the Senate here in Texas 29-1, meaning only one Democrat thought that that was an unreasonable ask. So, look, my opponent, he's part of the establishment. I mean, now that this is a binary choice and the field of 5 has shrunk to 2, boy, I could not state that there is a strong dichotomy here. It is America first versus the establishment. And unfortunate, what my trip down to the border showed is that everything that we've been doing so far at the behest of our establishment is all performative, and they don't really care.
Yeah, so let me make this very clear to everybody. The answer to that question, as John just stated in many different ways, is nothing. Nothing. Craig
Right.
Goldman represents the part of the Republican Party that has been an ineffective countervailing force to the Democratic Party for the last 40, 50 years, more. It will do nothing. He will do the same thing that all other Republicans have been doing. And you got to tell you, this is a guy, again, who voted against Ken Paxton. I don't know where the president is at on this race, because if he thinks Craig Goldman is going to be an ally, he is sadly, sadly mistaken. And that's
Hey,
it.
if he voted to impeach Ken Paxton, what makes you think he wouldn't vote to impeach President Trump?
100%. I was just about to say that. The first time that Donald Trump steps out of line, and Democrats, by the way, bring an impeachment because it is not at all certain that Republicans will keep the House. The very next time that happens, and it will happen, Craig Goldman will be right on that bandwagon, and you know it, and I know it. He represents the wing of the party that goes along to get along while all of this happens. Again, during that book club, John, it's like a lot of people didn't understand in 2020 the census. we do this count, and it's fairly new that we count illegal
Right.
residents, and it has an impact. That's a modern creation. That was not the case for most of the history of our census.
Right.
And it not only has an impact, so this guy couldn't even vote to prohibit illegals from voting in Texas. He's not only okay with it impacting how federal money's spent. He's not okay with how it impacting how districts are drawn. He's not only okay with how it impacts the electoral college votes that are allocated to each state based on that count. He's not only okay with allowing illegal residents to vote in elections, I mean, diluting and canceling out the votes of citizens, but apparently, I mean, everything else that comes along with it. Because if you're complicit on what is going on at the border, then you're complicit on all those fentanyl deaths. You're complicit on all of those horrible stories of human trafficking, all of
Right.
the floaters that, special investigation units at the Department of Homeland Security, that's their job basically to find these people. It's you're complicit in all of this evil, because there really isn't another word for it. It really is an evil. A couple of months ago for Human Trafficking Awareness Month, we had the chairwoman of an organization from Tennessee on to discuss her organization and what they do. People like Craig Goldman have allowed this to go on for many years, John, and they haven't even established resources for people who are victims of what they're
No.
allowing. I'm like
Right.
stunned this is a private institution. I'm stunned there is no government help. There's no state help for people. In the rare event we have a success story, and we get somebody back. Right. And for people
Yeah.
who didn't see the movie Sound of Freedom, in the rare event we have a success story like that, there's nowhere to bring these victims, to help them, to give them treatment for their trauma that they've endured,
To
to get
reintegrate them into society and to give them their lives back.
giving
In
them
fact,
their
it's the
life
same
back.
thing. It's the same thing here. We have an organization, a charitable nonprofit called the Five Stones Foundation. And in fact, the woman who started it and runs it is a good friend and somebody who's a supporter of mine. And it's the same thing. It's private charity that's taking a case because look, let's be honest, the federal government's complicit in this. The money that's going to the NGOs that are acting as concierge services for the traffickers, getting these people up here. I mean, it's utterly sickening.
It's
What I will
disgusting.
say is that while I was shocked at State Representative Goldman's vote on that SJR 35, the constitutional amendment, because that's a Democrat position. The dirty little secret is there are too many members in the Republican establishment and of the donor class who want this invasion because they want cheap wages, which was to your point earlier, and they also want expanded consumer market. And it's so bad and so barely kept beneath the surface that apparently the Congressional Budget Office has now baked those numbers into their projections.
It's unbelievable how we enabled this. Not only, the flood across the border. I mean, nothing was celebrated more than, from drug traffickers and human traffickers than policies that have been supported by both sides of the aisle for many, many years, going back even to NAFTA. I mean, the Lord of the Skies, right? The nickname for the Mexican drug lord. This guy celebrated NAFTA publicly, and we just thought, what, it was a good idea. I mean, and we've continued with the stupidity ever since. There's only ever been, let's be honest here, whether you love or hate. I'm talking to the viewers out there. I know where you stand on President Trump. Whether you love or hate Donald Trump, there's only ever been one man, and before he was even president, who now leads a single movement, because Bernie's a cave. He's a cave artist. I mean, he's just a despicable betrayer. He used to be very much in agreement with America First on these issues. But now it's not cool to be in his party anymore. So he's flipped the script after 40 years I mean, unbelievable. 40 years of public life. Now he's completely done a 180.
Once he became a millionaire.
Once he got his second house for giving up the fight and betraying his voters. But yeah, I mean, this has been one movement in all of these years that has advocated for pushing back on any of this. The truth is, like you said, it's a dirty, a little secret, but it's an open secret in DC. They are all for this, John. That's why we're in this position. Everyone has their different motives and their different reasons, but they're all for it. And I gotta, before I let you go, because I know it's 101, I got to take a break here. I'm going to do the next. I would love to do the next segment. Start it off with you here. Before that, you have interesting experience in the private sector, in community banking and in finance, and you understand the regulatory monster in that world.
Yep.
We're gonna try to help explain people in the next segment. Which I'm gonna lead in with you here. We're going to try to help explain to people why American voters don't feel this, right? So why voters in the 12th district aren't feeling this boom that Democrats and the media are talking about. And from your perspective, there's no, it's insane, but that it's still a top issue, the economy, inflation. We always ask it separate, but let's all wrap it all together here. With your experience, do you see anything in the next 6 months or so that could happen? I mean, gas prices are 90 a barrel, brother. I mean, we all know where this is going. Do you see anything that can happen that could really, truly improve the economy for real that could help Joe Biden?
No, sadly, and you notice they've stopped talking about and celebrating Bidenomics because, the reality, and again, the real life experiences of people, the working class and middle
Yeah.
class,
Yeah.
is that they understand that the CPI index has been changed in order to fudge the numbers because when they're going out and they're only being able to afford, 60, 70% of the groceries that they used to be able to afford before, and then people are touting, well, look, wages grew 4%. That's nominal. That's nothing compared to the inflation that they're experiencing, which is, basically left them at about 80 cents on the dollar from where they were when Donald Trump left the White House.
Yeah.
And then the last thing that they keep doing is they keep talking about the employment numbers. Well, that's because almost a quarter of all working age men have left the workforce because they're not seeking employment, and that the number of disabled people, surprisingly enough, that correlates very strongly with the vaccine rollout, continues to escalate at exorbitant levels never seen before by the insurance company. And oh, by the way, those jobs, they're going from full-time jobs to part-time jobs. And so
Yep.
somebody having to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make it, just make it, it's counting as 2 or 3 jobs, whereas it's really one person trying to make it up. And okay, the last thing that they really don't like being pointed out, guess what? Almost all of those new jobs that were created after they unlocked our economy are all being occupied by immigrants, either legal or illegal. Think about that for a second. I mean,
John, you
the numbers
okay.
almost correlate 100%.
John, you just basically laid out the 5 graphs that we're going to go over in this next segment. I mean, you
Well, great
nailed it
minds
all
think alike.
because everyone's, it's such a boost. Everything's so great. This was the last jobs report that we had, was the first report in almost a full year that was not combined over the last prior 2 months, revised down during Obama,
Hey,
during the
by the way,
Biden.
isn't it interesting that every time they make a mistake, it's always in one direction?
I know this is. Do you have any idea? And you do. You know how statistically unlikely it is for them to constantly have revisions 10, 11 out of the 12-month rolling period, all downward revisions. It is not possible, John. I mean, it just does not happen like that. I mean, is it sure, it's possible. What is the likelihood of it? Extremely unlikely. But you nailed it all. I mean, the fact of the matter is, why would the voter feel it? There's a certain group in this country which is voting Democrat, which is a professional class. They're doing okay. Everybody else is not. This is now turning back into a service sector part-time economy the way it was under Obama. I mean,
Right.
it's undoing so much of the real job growth, the real wage growth. And it's also, to me, there's an element of national security and economics, John. There is. And it's many multifaceted. One of them being that having a service dominated economy makes you a weak nation. If you don't have a goods producing economy, yeah, your tax base is weaker. That's not the sum total of it. You're not able to turn your country into a war machine if and when it becomes necessary to do it. You don't have the capacity. You don't have the latent power to do it. You just don't.
We
So
don't have the manufacturing, and the country doesn't have the balance sheet.
that's
That's the sad
a
reality of
whole
it.
other part. Yeah.
And this is also intentional. If you look at 8 years under the Obama administration, I nearly said Biden, which
I almost
probably
did the
isn't
same
far from
thing.
the truth. But yeah, what do you have? $1,000 worth of increase in workers' wages over that 8 year period.
Yeah.
And then in President Trump's, you had over $4,000. In fact, in 2019, before his economy was cut out from under him by this pandemic that was unleashed against us, you had non-managerial working class wages rise 10%. I mean, that was unheard of. And then what's happened under the Biden administration? You've just turned around and given it all away, and that's without even taking into consideration inflation, which basically ends up being a gut punch because people are not only earning less, but now their dollar is only worth about 80 cents of what it was, 4 years ago.
For guys like us who like read the panels of the, ISM manufacturing and non-manufacturing indexes, really look into that stuff. And we're going to see it. And then on the next hour, there is no argument that says, well, it was the pandemic and that happened under Trump. And no, on every gauge we were just talking about, everything is clearly V-shaped, including the CPI inflation, including wholesale inflation, the PPI. It was all V-shaped recovery. This happened under Biden. And if you read those panel responses you would see it in the suppliers, they would say, I don't know. I just don't know what Biden is. He going to yoke up the supply chain again? Is he going to shut something down? Like, are we going to hit some arbitrary number of too many infections and it's all going to close again? Like, I'm not cranking up production. I'm not building up business inventories. I'm not doing this. I'm not committing to more CapEx, not until I know where we stand. And then there's the matter of policy. Is he going to undo Donald Trump's regulatory reform? Is he going to do this? And by the way, what did he do? He did. So, I mean, the huge number there is that it's basically those Americans who did get some of these jobs, it's just them busting, and you're going to see it in hours worked versus, what kind of jobs they are. It's just them busting their hump harder to make less. And it's tragic. It's really tragic. And there's Mark Twain, buddy, lies, damn lies, and statistics. There's an easy way for the BLS to put out BS every month to try to make it look good. And that's what they do. John, thanks so much, brother, as always, for joining us, folks. John O'Shea running in Texas 12 against, Rhino, Craig Goldman. I mean, nothing will change with a guy like that. Tell people where they can follow you, John, and keep up with what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So, our country is being managed for failure by our ruling class elites. And notice I say ruling class because our elected officials forget that they are servants. They work for us. This is government by we the people, for the people, by the people. And it's supposed to be through the consent. Well, if you don't consent anymore and don't plan on complying, then I'm your candidate. We need more America First people in Congress. We cannot have another Paul Ryan situation when President Trump wins his third term and actually gets to serve his second. We cannot have the next president after him going in and chucking 36 executive orders the first week in office because there weren't strong-willed Republicans who were willing to codify his policies. So please follow me at O'Shea, the number 4, Texas.org. That is OSHEA, Texas.org, for Texas.org. Thanks, Rich, and all my love to Laura.
Had the .com up there. It's .org. So that's our fault.
That website's still live, but yeah, the new and improved one is at .org.
Check it out, guys. Go follow John. And as always, John, thanks so much for coming on, telling us what's going on, with your trip down there, and
Wish the news was better.
Yeah, me too, brother. Me too. Keep us posted. Good luck out there. And I'll talk to you soon, my friend.
Thanks. God bless.
God bless. John O'Shea, ladies and gentlemen. John O'Shea, Texas 12, running against Craig Goldman. Now it's just a two-man race. Goldman was under 50, now forcing it to a runoff. High interest voters vote in runoff elections. John absolutely can do this. But he's got to get out there in front of people like he's trying to do. So I'm glad he came on and shared with us this experience, because voters have got to hear what he was told down there, and he's doing great. He's doing great. Like I said, you really don't know. And I know everybody's working, and this is not your job. Your job is your job. And then you listen to shows like this. And John is running for to have a job where this stuff becomes his daily life. And I'm telling you, until you listen to these guys and girls and go down and hear their troubles, hear their stories, and you don't know the full extent of it, how much more support they got from the prior administration than this one. And there's no other reasonable conclusion to draw other that there is, by the ruling class, which is both parties, but no doubt in Democrats, there's more agreement on that side when it comes to this issue. This is a wholesale invasion and an attempt to. They don't care about your suffering because of this. They don't care. Roger Stone, former advisor to the president, I was on his show. He had a similar situation. They lost a member of their family. As we had lost a member of our community. Here's the horrible truth. They don't care about them. They don't care about them. What they want, which is more votes, what they want, which is cheap labor, and the worse, even darkest parts of these stories is not only the complicit or like turning a blind eye, but the active participation. We've got to have a real conversation about the corrupting influence of these cartels on our so-called public servants. This is never going to end. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse unless we make it end. And the only way to do that at this moment, at this time, is to replace people or not elect people who have been completely okay with it forever. How the hell could Craig Goldman justify not voting for a ban on illegals voting in Texas elections? How could you justify a no vote on that bill? And this is a man who voted to impeach Ken Paxton. There was no investigation in the House. From the trial in the Senate, the facts came out. He rammed with other leadership. He's a Dade Phelan sycophant. He rammed through that Paxton impeachment in the House, lying to the voters of Texas. And it was only until the Senate, and by the way, only a handful of senators with the spine and the character to stop it. After all that evidence was aired during the Senate trial, the impact of dirty money, of corrupt money, still almost removed Ken Paxton. Just disgraceful. This is what I'm talking. I mean, this is what I mean when I say that people, human beings, always try to look for the other to blame. The truth is, we're the ones to blame. We are the ones who elect these dirtbags over and over and over. They do real harm to us. They do. Personally, professionally, they do real harm, and they're awarded for it by getting elected or getting reelected by voters who didn't take the time to look and see what the facts were. If you oppose illegal immigration and you live in Texas 12, you cannot vote for Craig Goldman. I don't care what he says. I don't care what a mailer promised you. You need to be smarter than that. It's that simple. Otherwise, it's over. Just throw your hands up. You could sit around and tell your grandkids at Christmas next year how you effed it all up. I'm serious. Deadly serious. Deadly serious. They are. You haven't noticed? Why do you think they get so upset when you bring up something like replacement theory? They only ever flip the hell out like that when they know you're over the target. All right. It's just so obvious. It's not even funny. All right. I knew John would be the right person to ask about that stuff too, because we're probably not gonna have time to go over every single chart that I want to go over, but well, because it's already 1:15 and there was some stuff I wanted to do. I guess we're not gonna have much time to talk too much more about some of the polling results. There is more that I wanted to discuss with you guys. Um, It's getting, like I said, there are like two possibilities at this point. And I know I got to go to a commercial break, but there are two possibilities. One is that Donald Trump's going to overperform his polling numbers by about 2.5 points nationally, like he has been doing for both presidential elections, or we're all just wrong and he's not. And, I mean, that would be a bit novel. But there's only one way that happens, or there's not one way. There's a few ways, but this is how there's only one way to think about it. He typically polls weaker with whites than he performs. Go back and look at the New York Times poll from 2020. They had Biden losing whites to Trump by like 7 or 9 points. Depending on which one you believe, the validated voter survey or the exit polls, Trump won whites by like 13 to 16 points, depending on which one you put more stock into. No poll had him winning whites by that. Even the Fox News poll, which had Biden plus 6 or 7 nationally as their final, anyway, they had Biden losing whites by, I believe, roughly the same margin, about 7 or 9 points. And then non-whites, we all know the story. 4% black support in the New York Times poll, something very, very similar in the Fox poll. No support to speak of in the Quinnipiac poll. It was literally a hyphen. No support, not enough to even put on a crosstab. And now everybody is roughly sitting in the same neighborhood of about 20%. A little bit more, but give or take. Hispanics, usually in those polls anyway, high 20s, low 30s. He wound up getting closer to 40%, but 37 ballpark. Again, it depends which one you believe, which one you put more stock into. So, one possibility is that he is polling correctly with whites and it ends up being a little bit weaker. And he does better with non-whites, but it's not enough because he loses too much of the white vote. Or there is that he overperforms with whites and underperforms the poll gains that the gains with non-whites that you see in the polls right now. Or there's the third option, which is what makes Democrats so nervous. What makes Teixeira so nervous on the Liberal Patriot on Substack every week. That he polls the way he's polling with whites right now and then performs the way he typically does perform with them, which is several points better than the polls suggest. And maybe he doesn't get 20% of the black vote or 22, or whatever some of these polls have. I think we were at 22 nationally. We're higher in some of the battleground states, but maybe he doesn't get in the mid 20s, folks. That's a little high. Maybe he doesn't get in the low 20s. That's a little high. Maybe he doesn't even get 20. That's a little high, but he gets 16. He gets mid to high teens. Maybe he doesn't win Hispanics overall, like some polls are showing, the New York Times among them. We are not. We have Biden winning, but by very, very close margins, like 52 to 45, 7-point margins. Maybe that happens. Maybe he doesn't win Hispanics, but he gets 45%. That would be combined with how he typically polls versus performs among whites. Then that would be obviously the nightmare, doomsday, worst case scenario for Joe Biden. I can't yet say, though, and for Democrats, because in Pennsylvania, while Trump led Joe Biden in a closer match, albeit, but He led Joe Biden. Democrats are ahead in the generic ballot. In Michigan, he's got more coattails. So Republicans have a slight edge. A lot of people still undecided. With some of the decisions they're making, I do not put any stock in their ability to turn that around. And the worst part about it is the worst part about it in my mind is it just seems wrong, but it will happen. Well, or it has in the past. We'll see. It doesn't 100% mean this will happen. But in the past, both times, Republicans, rhinos, they get more from the Trump coalition when Trump's on the ballot than Trump ever gets from their coalition. Meaning the Trump voter, largely, in the past anyway, has said, okay, I'll vote for these guys down ballot to give Trump some backup. To send him some back. Send him so he can roll there deep. But certain people, certain Republicans, did not extend the same courtesy. And they voted for Republicans down ballot, but voted for Joe Biden for president. Or a Democratic senator for president. If you're a certain political family in, I don't know, let's say Arizona, who fits that bill, this is your fault. All of those horror stories we just talked about with John O'Shea, this is your fault. All of the economic data that we're about to go over after the break, that really, those are people. Those numbers, they're people. They represent human beings. They represent your fellow Americans, or at least in all but one case. All of what they've had to endure and suffer, it's your fault. You're not a patriot. You're a punk. You're not a patriot. You're a petulant child. Anyone floating in a body of water by the border for real is on you. The government you elect is the government you deserve. Thomas Jefferson. Let's take a break. Speaking of the battleground state of Michigan, it's a word from our friends in Michigan, Jam and Bean. Jamandbean.com. There you can see it up there and there, man, I'm really getting, my whole family is really getting partial to these teas. But these guys are great. They are patriots, number one. Pushed back against the COVID tyranny that was and have been rebuilding ever since. They make a great product. Coffee roasting is, of course, an art, and these guys are artists, but there's so much more now than even, coffee roasting. Since they first became a sponsor, they've grown their product line significantly. I love their gourmet popcorn, which you can see on the screen right now. They've turned me into a tea person. That's right. They turned it alpha male, coffee drinking son of a like me into somebody who absolutely loves teas. Everything's organic. Their R&D behind the medium bold. I mean, the body on this thing is unbelievable. Their R&D behind it means it's the only medium roast K-cup that I'll even use. All right. They, of course, have freshly ground beans that you could grind yourself and roast. And brew how you love to, by your preferred method, because I am the same way. But I also do use go to the K-cups when sometimes I just K-pods, whatever you call it. Whenever I just don't have the time. Look at that. You can see on the screen right there, a rich, full-bodied medium roast. They're the only ones who have that. And it's delicious. Absolutely delicious. If you visit Jam and Bean right now, JAMNBean.com, JAMNBean.com, and sign up for a new subscription. Use the promo code TPP40, obviously for the People's Pundit, TPP40 at checkout. That's going to get you 40% off your first subscription, plus when the subscription renews, it's going to automatically give you another 10% off every month. on renewal. So it's an incredible deal. They've kept it with us for a really long time. That's super generous of them for us, for the People's Pundit. And I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful that they did that. I'm thankful for them. Happy to be with them. Happy to partner with them. They're a great company and great people. Little beautiful family. Again, jamandbean.com, promo code TPP40 at checkout. 40% off right off the rip and a 10% discount every month when it renews. Okay, let's start kicking it off. Let's kick it off with this. Just the front page of the excuse me, BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, instead of Bureau of right, Laura? You won't let me use that. But here we go. Here's their headlines. And, looking at the headlines, you would think it's all rosy and gold out there, folks. Payroll employment rises by 303,000 in March. Unemployment rate changes little at 3.8%. Really low. That's low. Job gains, are you ready? Occurred in healthcare, government, and construction. 1 out of 3 of those, you would think, is a fairly good sign. So why aren't Americans feeling this boom when so many jobs have been added in healthcare, government, and construction this month? We'll tell you in 30 seconds. Stay tuned. Dun, 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 dun. All right, we're back inside the numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. If you like the videos, don't forget to like them, share them far and wide, and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, mosey on over to Rumble. Don't forget to follow us there as well and like the videos. Oh, and of course, the best place to follow us, of course, is on Locals, peoplespundit.locals.com. For those who didn't hear the beginning of the show, which thank you so much for participating in the Pooch Playoffs, March Madness, which Winston was the regional champion for, raising $2,500 for the cause of war in our area. Our regional chapter. And thank you for participating in the international, which you did not win, but we're still grateful for the initial donation, that we were able to bring into that organization. Great organization. Okay, let's get on down to the dirt. Let's get down to the business, shall we? All right, let's look at it. So we were just saying about how all these great headlines and people don't feel it. It's just incredible, right? All right. Before we go into this PDF here, all right, this here PDF, let's take a look at a little sidebar first. Unemployment looks great, right? The CPI up another 0.4 of a percentage point. Average hourly earnings, it's up 12 cents. You'd think it looks good. Productivity, a little bit better. Employment cost index is up about a point. It's a little bit, but the PPI below the producer price index, which is wholesale inflation. The CPI is, of course, inflation for you at your point in the economy. It's the consumer price index, 0.4, a little hot. All right. PPI, 0.6, also a little hot. Ultimately, if producers are paying more, what do you think is going to happen to you? Right. But even beyond all that, let's look at here and there, a little handy dandy PDF. Their jobs that they're touting in this report, 2 out of 3 of them, those two, they really highlighted healthcare, government, and education. Healthcare, government, and construction for the month of March. Construction usually should be celebrated. Why? Because you're looking for new residential builds, right? You're looking for correlating reports that back it up for new residential construction. And of course, then after that, lagging indicator, what a new home sales look like, right? Which you're going to get from the Commerce Department and the like. All right. So that normally, along with manufacturing, would be great because you want, of course, a goods producing economy. It produces not only higher wages for the average person, but it's a broader base economy that it supports more people. It is not an exclusive economic build. It's an inclusive economic build. When you have, let's say, I don't know, healthcare, government, and other professional services like that, you're talking about highly credentialed Democrats, and that's it. And everybody else who's in leisure and hospitality has the blessing of waiting on them. And often, because they're crap jobs, have to wait on them hand and foot more than one shift. What about construction? Well, as John said, unfortunately, the vast majority are not taken by U.S. citizens. They're just not. The unemployment rate for Black Americans increased to 6.4%. The rates for Hispanics and Asians decreased 4.5 and 2.5 respectively. I did that a little bit backwards if you're reading online. We can go on. The long-term unemployed sat at 1.2 million, which they called unchanged. Largely was little changed. Get this. Long-term unemployed is 1 out of 5 unemployed people in this country. Labor force at 62.7%. I'm sorry, no. The labor force participation rate is 62.7. And I used to do this a lot when I was the data journalism editor at PBD. The employment population ratio is a far less cited statistic, but it is equally or arguably, if not as important, more important than labor force participation. Labor force participation below 63% sucks. Sucks. It would not hit or exceed 63% in the Obama era for nothing. Nothing. And unfortunately, in the Biden era, it won't either. Under Trump, however, not only did it hit and slightly exceed it, it routinely held firm at it until COVID came along. It took a little bit to get there, but once it did, it held for long periods of time. Would it dip down a little bit? Sure. But then it would pop back up. The number of people employed part-time for economic reasons also little changed at a whopping 4.3 million. 5.4 want a job but can't find one. Why does this matter? This is a methodological gimmick. When labor force participation is weak, the way that the methodology works for the Bureau of Labor Statistics can sometimes mislead you into thinking it's a stronger labor market than it is when you just look at the unemployment rate and often too weekly jobless claims. A truly strong labor market is when labor force participation is at or above 63%. Jobless claims are below 2 weekly jobless claims, or initial jobless claims as they are sometimes called, or as they are actually called. The media refers to them as weekly jobless claims. When that is below 200,000, the unemployment rate is also low and labor force is 63 or above. That is a truly tight labor market or a strong labor market. When the unemployment rate dips because there just simply are less people in the workforce, it is not a strong labor market. It is a methodological gimmick. This is what happened all through the Obama era. In fact, when employment fell after the Great Recession, which they touted like crazy, including the fudging of the report right before the election in 2012 to hurt Mitt Romney, it was all a gimmick. Americans did not feel that gimmick. Hillary Clinton ran largely as staying the course. Things are good under Obama right now. The economy's doing great. We don't know what Trump's talking about. You can't get economic growth that strong. GDP will never hit 3% again. This is the new normal, and that's okay. Americans did not feel that, so they did not buy that. And we're seeing this now with the polling today. People are not feeling it. They simply are not. Healthcare added 72,000 jobs. As if they haven't been doing well enough since COVID. Trillions of dollars being injected into their public sector. I mean, into their sector, their specific sector. Construction added 39,000. That's not what drove the numbers. Leisure and hospitality returned to its pre-pandemic level. Others have not yet, but leisure and hospitality was almost 50,000, more than construction. Why did the Bureau of Labor Statistics choose to cite construction, to highlight construction, when we all know that this report was driven by government crap, healthcare, and leisure and hospitality? Back to Obama era crap. Service sector economy with a dominant professional class, which votes for the ruling class, is the only one who gets domestic jobs, and anyone else who wants one has to wait on them. And apparently, even worse than the Obama administration, pay for more goods. That's the truth. Okay. First of all, let's go into those who are unemployed part-time for economic reasons, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics said was largely unchanged. As you can see, the huge spike here during COVID. But during the Trump administration, you very, very, very clearly see, with the exception of a short period in January of 2019 where there was a spike. I would think this is accurately characterized as a spike. I wouldn't think. I would say that it's a 1 month spike. With the exception of that, you can clearly see part-time employment for economic reasons trending down. From Obama's era, where it was also trending down, but that's really what was dominant when it came to job creation. That's what people were dealing with. Now, and again, I'm going to just point out the V-shaped recovery here. Here is the election. By the election, you can already see how much it had fallen compared to the spike from COVID. It was cut in half. Almost cut in half. Very much an inverse V, whatever. And you can see that things were going on the right track. Then, midterms, things start to, if you want to call it, stabilize. Does it repeat its decline? Does it repeat the pre-pandemic trend? Or not repeat it. Does it return to the pre-pandemic trend? No. It declines. I mean, it reverses, excuse me. And it starts to increase again. Heading back to Obama levels. That really blows. And you can see it when you're looking at hours worked, by the way. This is for, of course, both. But you can see it obviously clear as day right here. It's now even spiked above. Why is it spiked above? Because more people are working more. And are they getting paid more for it? Are we to believe these polls with Hispanics? I mean, folks, they started experiencing, and God, look at the Obama era. Let's give them the Great Recession for where it falls. That's fine. Let's do that. But the recession was over by the spring and summer of 2009. Despite summer of recovery. Remember that? These guys were touting how the American, what was it called? The American Investment and Recovery Act, which was basically a stimulus Keynesian crackpot spending bill. It wasn't, I don't want to call it an economic revival plan. That's how it was sold, but that's not the hiccups. That's not what it was. It was a thank you to everyone who donated to Barack Obama to run against John McCain. It was a kickback to Barack Obama's supporters. Thank you. Here's your money back, plus more. $800 billion. And there's tons of research out there to suggest it not only did nothing to stimulate economic growth, but in fact likely hindered economic growth. Well, if you're Hispanic and you're 16 years or older, it wasn't looking that good for you here, was it? Come 2012, in the first quarter of 2012, things maybe start to look like they're picking up a little bit, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't. But Obama's popular with Hispanics, and they're still mad at Republicans for being the party of George W. Bush. Hell, they nominated a guy who was basically the Mormon version of George Bush. Worse. 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 Bush was evangelical. Mitt Romney's, of course, Mormon. But so many of their policies, especially foreign policy, very, very, very similar. Worst possible person to nominate. And they vote, Mitt Romney gets like 20-something% of the Hispanic vote. Gets killed. Gets crushed. Fast forward, there is some growth here, but overall it's just an up and down, kind of like a bobber in the water if you're fishing. You know what I'm talking about? It's not down, because you don't have a full-on bite. Maybe you have like some crappie or a bluegill or something like gnawing on your bait, or maybe you just have a really lively shiner still, so the bobber's just going a little bit up and down. It's not a full-on dive. Anyway, it's doing a little bit better. Nothing to speak of. Comes the era of Donald Trump, and median usual weekly earnings really do start to rise significantly. Significantly. Oh yeah, Laura, we got to get solar eclipse glasses if we can. I forgot about that. I totally forgot about that. Anyway, then COVID happens. Right? You can see, boom, pops up and starts to decline again. Since Biden's been around, it's been flat. There's been nothing. Nothing. Despite the fact that people are working more hours. So what does that mean? I think it's pretty obvious. And it certainly does help when it comes to this idea of, can we believe these polls, right? Because if we go and we look at African Americans, we're going to see the same thing, guys. John was right. I mean, and if you're, like a department, like a chamber of commerce kind of person, you're like, yeah, that's good. We're paying less for wages. Why would we stop this? The people who are here now, we can ignore them and pay new people less. They'll be able to get a job somewhere else. Remember hashtag learn the code? Yeah, well, they're not even doing that. It's learn to serve a cocktail. Hashtag learn to wait. Hashtag learn to bus tables. Hashtag learn to scrub toilets for double shifts. Why are they feeling it? Why aren't they feeling it? And then, of course, we all know how much people are paying more for essential items and goods. Here, of course, is gas prices. We all know, of course, what has happened here when we're talking about the cost per barrel that John and I were just discussing. It's a huge deal. A huge deal. Everybody almost, if you own a car, crappy car, brand new car, maybe a mid car, a decent car. You got the kids you got to bring back and forth. I don't know about you, but it's a pretty busy day for us over here. One's got dance, one's got jazz band. Got to go to the grocery store. Food prices are up. According to the last CPI, what was really up, what caused that heat for 2 months in a row, shelter. These are things that people cannot get away from. They cannot escape it. You know who can? Professional class Democratic voters who live in urban areas. They'll take an Uber. Maybe Uber passes off some of that expense, maybe not. They'll just take public transportation. They got their pass anyway. Doesn't bother them. You know who it does hurt? People who are lucky enough to have a vehicle, or non-white, lower income workers who will have to hop on a bus every day. City's going to pass that along if they got to pay for it. Maybe they don't have their T-Pass. Maybe they don't have their Metro card. They don't do that. They pay by the day. They don't get those savings. By the way, Laura, did you know about that today? I just got the message myself. Apparently, it's been changed. Let me just shoot her a text so she knows. Yep. And he cannot miss it, Laura. He can't. He's missed they've rescheduled or changed things way too much. Just way too much. And it does look like, oh, okay. You did know? Okay. What? What does that mean? With what? Okay. Hang on 1 second, guys. Whatever you do, just don't ping on my walls, big guy. I'm sorry. She was messaging back, yep, and it turned it to help. And look, Laura and I have known each other for so many years. She does not say help if there's unless there's something wrong. So I immediately just jumped the hell off my chair with the quickness, because it would mean in normal circumstances that there's a significant issue. She handles pretty much everything on her own without a problem. If she needs help, it's something off. There's something wrong here. So we're back on the upswing with gas. If you look at it, there are gas prices right there. You can see it's back on the upswing. If you look at it through the CPI, which of course lags a month, we can see what happened during the I was going to say the Obama era, Biden era again, but you can see what happened during the Biden era here. I really want to zoom in on this because this is so important. Gas is so indicative. It's such a good example of what. Let's go here. Gas is such a good example of what we had been talking about. You can see the COVID era. They wanted to blame COVID. They wanted to blame then when that didn't work, Putin. It's just totally outrageous. It is not supported at all by the data, and yet they just continue to do it. They just continue to tell these stories. They continue to tell these lies. They're not true. They're lies. Inflation is not down, things like that we hear all the time. Gas did not rise because Putin declared war on Ukraine. Putin invaded Ukraine. Gas was rising way, way before that, as you can see right here. And you can also see, even though it's tough because it's a lagging indicator, you can see there's a bit of stabilization there. We had that COVID period. People stopped using gas. Price went down. It was a quick pop up because of demand. Then the summer of 2020 comes. It levels out. Joe Biden is inaugurated and it explodes. And it continues to explode long before Putin invaded Ukraine. Does it get worse? Did that exacerbate it? Temporarily for a time. And then gas prices started to come down in the winter of 23. And politicians are going to be politicians, folks. But everybody knows that the summer driving season sees a spike typically. It wasn't receding because of any kind of like brilliant economic policy move or change or something. So it's just laughable on its face. Laughable. There is less demand in the wintertime. There's also been things that went on behind the scenes that you didn't even know about, likely. You got crappier quality gas, although the label when you were buying it never changed. It never said, hey, this is crappier quality gas. And by the way, you're paying more for it. But people are looking at that price when they go to the pump. That's what they're looking at when they decide whether or not they feel better economically. And when you look at our own polling with the Registered Voter Economic Confidence Index, there is a bounce back. People did feel like things were getting better than the worst that they had experienced. But it certainly wasn't positive by any means. And we have time to show this one chart real quick before we fade out to the music here at the bottom of the hour. Here's the Registered Voter Economic Confidence Index. Pre-Trump levels to your left. Biden era levels throughout. And you can see there was an increase in our last national poll that we did in the new year, right at 2 months after the holidays, a month and a half after the holidays, not that far long ago. And there was a problem because typically when the index converges and people have the same sentiment about the future and the current situation, it means that they don't see anything better. Things aren't getting better for the future. How it is right now is how I kind of expect it to be. And there's not going to be any change, no better or worse. When it's negative, that means you're generally insinuating or genuinely predicting that there's going to be continued negative circumstances and negative environment, which typically means recession. If it converges when it's positive, you may be looking at the end of the growth period in the business cycle, but it's still positive. They just, at least in their minds, voters don't believe anything's getting better at that point. But typically, as you can see right here, people have a more positive view of the future than they do the present, even when the present sucks. Americans are inherently optimistic, by the way. But twice now under Joe Biden, that has not been the case. Twice now under Joe Biden, it's been, I don't want to use that expression because, I mean, you're going back to like May of 22. It certainly is the accurate expression. It is a little bit better now, albeit marginally, more than marginally, because margin was like 1.7 in this last one. People kind of have like malaise is a good way to put it. 2 years ago, I would have said like they're just wholesale putting their hands in the air and saying, I'm done. I quit. This is not working. It is what it is. It sucks, but what are you going to do? Here it is. It's getting a little better, but I think it's about as good as it's going to get. That's what that says to me when I look at the results of this index. The most recent one, people were like, you know what? Maybe it did improve a little bit. But this is as good as it's going to get. I'll end it with saying this. People who had real booms, authentic booms, and under Trump, he was one cylinder away from having this country firing on all 4 cylinders, and that was the housing market, which is got serious problems now. It's a horrible time to be a home buyer, especially especially a first-time home buyer. Once rates went to 4 or 5%, then once upon a time, you may have been able to qualify for a mortgage with like a 650 credit score or 660 credit score with a 3% rate. Maybe the bank maybe would have let you get through there. Now, that's not going to happen. They're not gonna, especially with, the medium income. Maybe they were going to let you do that then. They're not going to let you do it now. And they're not. You need a much, much higher credit score. Your interest rate's going to be much, much higher, twice as much as those who were getting mortgages during the Trump era. Twice, as more than twice. Fed had no choice. With inflation, they had to jack rates a little. They had to. Caused banking failures for a moment there, or at least helped to precipitate banking failures. They're a one-trick pony. That's the problem. But I will end this with saying those who had these periods of like real boom, because right before COVID, we were just seeing builder confidence get to these, well, they were historic levels. And new residential construction, which of course should lag builder confidence, was starting to 3, 6 months in that kind of a lagging period, and even started to tighten more than that, was starting to mirror what you would expect from these historic builder confidence numbers. And those new residential constructions stats were starting to come in to back that up. The National Association of Realtors, which you have to take with a grain of salt because they are essentially a housing lobby. They have the pending home sales index and the existing home sales index. Pending has to deal with contracts, right? So they're still widely followed. And everything pointed to like right before COVID, this was going to be the four cylinder was going to start. It was doing well. Don't get me wrong. It was doing well, but it wasn't booming like the labor market was booming, like manufacturing was booming, like other areas of construction was booming. It wasn't quite there yet. Then, those construction numbers really started to build up, driven by new residential construction and sales. And it was really getting to that point. Then COVID hit, unfortunately, and there we are. I really do believe had Trump won a second term, all of these, as we can see from the data, you can go to every chart if you want to. It doesn't matter. The long-term unemployed number, long-term users of unemployment insurance, whatever gauge you want to look at, even the CPI, as we were looking at before, that recovered, that returned to its mean, and we were looking at moving forward. Had we, I really do believe that under Trump, it would have done that. And then housing would have kicked back into gear. We hopefully would not have had a second gargantuan spending package. So maybe we would not have had to dramatically raise rates. And I think, honestly, I know it's not dramatic by normal standards, but it is dramatic by modern monetary policy standards. Maybe we would not have had to do that. Housing still would have been affordable. Home prices would not be, out of control, have blown out of control the way they are, because you're going to pay twice as much in many cases around where Laura and I live, where there was a lot of construction before Biden. And there's still, it completely came to a halt. Completely. You're going to pay, Laura, I'm not exaggerating, 2 times the amount, almost two times the amount for the home, right? Because it's just the cost. There were builders pulling out of contracts that they signed with prospective clients. Why? Because they gave them a number. Maybe the cost of the vinyl went up. Maybe the cost of the vinyl went up. The cost of timber went up. Everything. PVC, concrete, everything. So they can no longer abide by those costs. Anyway, one of the things that really does get lost on everybody when we look at people like a Trump or a Reagan, everyone looks to government to come up with some perfect policy. And the truth is, the genius of those two men when it came to the economy was simple. The policies get out of the way, and the role of the president is to cheerlead. Reagan and Trump were incredible cheerleaders of American ingenuity, of the American economy, of the American worker, of the American entrepreneur. And in return, all of those people knew that government wasn't going to be a problem for them. And as long as they operated within the bounds of the rules and the laws, they could prosper. And you just get the hell out of the way. Ensure that there's fair play, fair competition. Just get out of the way. Reagan was brilliant. He was a brilliant cheerleader when it came to that. His tax cuts were only half of it. Trump, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a huge achievement. It put the tax rate for businesses right in what we know to be the Goldilocks zone. Thank you to the very left-wing OECD, very left-wing World Bank, and one of them is Paris Base, for crying out loud. It's not exactly a right-wing international bureaucracy. We have data for 50 years in the developed economic world, or the economically developed world. We know what works and what doesn't, and where Trump and Republicans put the business tax rate is right in the Goldilocks zone, not only, by the way, for economic growth, but for increased revenue to national treasuries. And guess what else? Workers' wages. We have probably done 50 to 100, I don't even know, between other writers and everything on PPD, even before Trump came along. We had been talking about this for years. There is a known range where you lower it too much and you're going to take in too little. You raise it too much, people will engage in tax avoidance. They won't hire, they won't raise costs because the cost of employment is going to go too high. They're not going to hire new people. They're not going to increase wages. There's a Goldilocks zone. He put it right in there. So no doubt policy had something to do with it. But I'm telling you, the real genius, folks, was just their belief in the American people. I don't know how else to put it. They knew that if they just gave them the environment and the tools, they would make their magic. And the economy would roar. And the country would prosper. All right. That's it. It's 2:03. We're going to kick rocks. Don't forget, if you like the videos, don't forget to like them and share them far and wide. And, of course, the best place to follow us is on Locals. Thank you so much to John O'Shea, our guest today, for coming and sharing his experience at the border with us. Very eye-opening, as always. Go check John out at John O'Shea for Texas, the number 4, O'SheaForTexas.org. All right. Oh, the .com is still up, but the O'SheaForTexas.org is the new website. Tim Verskolben in the runoff for Texas 12. One more thing I thought I had. I guess I don't. But if I did, then, and I miss it, we'll talk about it on Wednesday. Nothing but love for you as always. Deuces. There's Laura. Deuces. Adorable. All right, later, guys.